Good evening. We're going to have a special evening tonight, and the good news is it's free. Thank you all for coming out on a Friday. This is part of the continuing series at the Reagan Library of having authors come and speak about their books, and tonight's going to be a great one. My name is Michael Castine. I had the privilege of serving Ronald Reagan in the White House for 6 years, and I currently serve as a trustee of the Reagan Library Foundation. So in this week that started Veterans Day, I'm proud to say that I had the honor of working for the President on the National Security Council staff, not to be confused with the NSA. So in honor of our men and women in uniform, especially those currently serving, we'd like you to join us to say please stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So backed by popular demand, this evening we welcome for their second appearance at the Reagan Library two of the greatest political journalists of our time, Mark Halperin and John Heilemann. They last joined us in 2010 to talk about what became their blockbuster political book and eventually a movie, award-winning movie, about the 2008 election. You probably all remember Game Change. Oh. Today they're going to tell us what will surely be the political blockbuster book of the 2012 election, and that's called Double Down. Game Change vaulted them into perhaps the most exclusive club in American journalism. It's a small club, Michael Kinsley wrote in his review of the book Double Down in this past weekend's New York Times book review. But if there was any doubt after Game Change, Kinsley wrote, with Double Down, they've earned the admission to the club. We all know the hallmarks of a Halperin Heilemann book. It's a page-turner, almost like a detective or a suspense novel or the movie Argo. Yes, you know the outcome, but you somehow can't, you're compelled to keep reading and reading. You get captivated along the way. Currently, the book is number 3 on the hardback list of the New York Times, behind Krauthammer and O'Reilly. I think they would have been in first place if their timing was a little better. But they are number 1 in ebook sales. And back to the book, despite knowing the excitement of the story, you're going to be treated to some of the most thorough and most balanced political reporting in America today. We were talking beforehand, and they did over 500 interviews during their research to write this book. And the authors are going to take you in historic meetings, put you on the scene of historic moments, and let you into the private thoughts of both the major players and the minor players who all contribute to getting presidents elected. In other words, they tell you about the people, not the numbers. John Heilemann is a national affairs editor of New York Magazine and a political analyst for MSNBC. He's also an award-winning journalist and author of Pride Before the Fall, a book about Microsoft, and he's a former staff writer for The New Yorker, Wired, and The Economist. Mark Halperin is editor-at-large and senior political analyst for Time Magazine, and he is also a senior political analyst for MSNBC. A graduate of Harvard, actually both of them graduated from Harvard, he has covered 7 presidential elections, and if you want to know what total I'm sorry, I'm not going to go there. We're going to, I was going to say something, but we can skip that. But anyway, today it's a day for excitement and enjoyment, and on the night Ronald Reagan was elected president, he told a cheering crowd in Los Angeles that it was the most humbling moment of his life. We are humbled today to have with us 2 of America's greatest journalists, Mark Halperin and John Heilemann, authors of Double Down. Gentlemen.
Michael, thank you for that gracious introduction. You read it just like we wrote it, and we appreciate that. We are not just humbled, but honored and thrilled to be here tonight, back at this library. This is the second time that we've been at the Reagan Library, which is, as I say, an honor. It also gives us the distinction of having been here once more than Chris Christie has been here, which makes us feel particularly good. The last time that we were here, we did not announce we were running for president. He did not announce that he was running for president. We'll see what happens tonight when Mark Halperin speaks. He might have a piece of news to break tonight about his plans for 2016. You never know. We have just started out on this book tour, and nowhere that we will go over the course of the next month means more to us than coming here, partly because it is such an incredible presidential library, partly because this is the part of the country that, for me personally, the part of the country where I grew up, partly because my father, who lives right down the street, is in the back row back there, so I get the pleasure of embarrassing him this evening, which is one of my great pastimes. And we also get a chance to talk about the book a little bit. We're going to talk for not very long because generally when we do these events, people have a lot of questions and a lot of things they want to ask, and we like to hear from you as much as we'd like to talk to you. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes, Mark's going to talk for a few minutes, and then we're going to take your questions. Michael mentioned that we wrote a book called Game Change, and some of you may have read that book. That book also got made into a movie. Some of you may have seen that movie. Anybody in the crowd who preferred the movie to the book, just keep it to yourself. The approach that we took in doing these two books is very similar. We tried to talk to a lot of people and write about the high human drama of running for president. Mark and I have been writing about presidential politics and national politics for a couple decades each, and we're interested in almost everything about it. We're interested in polling and numbers and demographics and policy and governance and every aspect of the whole political experience in America. But when it comes to these books, we're focused mainly on the human qualities of the people who run for president, the people who sit alongside them when they run, their families, their spouses. And we like to look at presidential politics as really not so much as a political endeavor as just one of the great competitions in American life. It's incredibly ambitious, smart, well-intentioned, idealistic people who are engaged in one of the great competitions that we have in our American life. And we try to drill in and show what it's like for them and how their strengths and weaknesses as people affect the contest, how the contest affects them, and what it really feels like to run for president. When we did the last book, we subtitled it Obama and the Clinton, McCain and Palin and the Race of a Lifetime. When you've called something the race of a lifetime, it sets a little bit of a problem for doing the next book because people ask, how are you ever going to replicate the last campaign, because you've already called that one the race of a lifetime. And there's a lot of drama in that campaign, people remember. Obviously, the Democratic nomination fight, a lot of drama there. There was the financial crisis in the fall of 2008, a lot of drama there. The first African-American president of the United States got elected, very dramatic race. In this race, there's also a lot of drama. There's also some comedy in the 2012 race, and so for us, we're able to write about both things that are dramatic and things that are a little bit more comedic, and we always search for humor in our work. There's you all remember Herman Cain running for the Republican nomination and referring to a country on the globe as Uzbeki, Becky, Stan. That was funny. There was Rick Perry, of course, who famously couldn't remember one of the departments of government that he wanted to abolish and saying oops in a presidential debate. That was pretty funny. Newt Gingrich, a laugh a minute throughout the 2012 campaign, a guy who we refer to throughout this book as the angry teddy bear. And then there were the candidates who were not particularly funny, but who still managed to generate some degree of humor. Mitt Romney, not thought of as a barrel of laughs generally. Rick Santorum, really not thought of as a barrel of laughs. But in Double Down, you will read John McCain deciding to endorse Mitt Romney over Rick Santorum on the basis that the Republican nomination fight had come down to the dog on roof guy versus the man on dog guy. And so he wanted to stick with the dog on roof guy. He thought that was the better outcome. John McCain, always good for a laugh. But there is, as I said, a lot of drama in this book too. And there were high stakes in this election. In a lot of ways, the election was a closer contest, a harder fought contest in a way than in 2008. A lot of people remember Republicans in 2008. Many of them had realized that after 8 years of George W. Bush, even there was some Bush fatigue in the Republican Party, and the general election was not a particularly closely fought thing. There was a lot of demoralized Republicans in 2008. In 2012, certainly Republicans and Democrats alike thought that the future of the country was at stake, and both sides were energized from the very beginning. President Obama, when he won re-election, we report in the book, told his top aides that this meant more to him than 2008, because in 2008 people were voting out of hope, and in 2012 he felt that people were voting as an affirmation on, were able to judge his record, and if they were voting for him, they were voting on something he'd actually done as opposed to something he was promising to do. Obviously his presidency right now is in some degree of trouble. We can talk about that in Q&A, but as I say, the stakes in the race felt very high to both sides, and although in the end the race was not particularly close, it was certainly hard fought. I said I wasn't going to talk for very long. I'm going to really just try to tell you one story before handing off to Mark. One kind of give you some insight into the kind of way we try to think about writing about presidential politics. And it's a story, one of the main story arcs in the book. And hopefully it'll tempt you to buy the book, because that really is why we're here. They're selling books downstairs. They will take cash, credit cards, traveler's checks, anything you have, they will take, and we will happily accept too. The story I'll tell you is a story that has both drama and comedy and consequence, and although I will not use any because we're here in this hallowed place, there's also profanity in this story. So which, as you can tell, drama, comedy, consequence, and profanity, it must be a story that involves the Clintons. We wrote in 2008, we wrote about what we thought of in some ways as the love story of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. It was an unusual and unlikely love story in which the two of them started out kind of liking each other an awful lot, and then ran against each other and ended up not liking each other very much. And then at the end, as in all good love stories, they ended up getting married in the political sense and going off to Washington together with Barack Obama as President of the United States and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. This book, in some ways, has as one of its major character arcs or story arcs the love story of Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, in some ways even more unlikely love story. If you think about where Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were in their interpersonal relationships at the end of 2008, they were not particularly fond of each other by the end of that campaign. And that kind of carried over. In the first 3 years of Barack Obama's first term, the two presidents rarely spoke. The most recent Democrat in the White House and the current one did not have a lot of interaction. That was not for lack of effort on President Clinton's part. He had a lot of advice to impart. President Clinton knows a lot of things and he thinks he knows even more than he actually knows. He has opinions about politics and governance and policy and music and food and vegan bean dip and sports and everything under the sun. And he wanted to tell President Obama what he thought about those things. President Obama, not a guy who takes a lot of advice from outside his inner circle, did not reach out very much to President Clinton until President Obama found himself in trouble in the late summer, early fall of 2011. You will recall after the debt ceiling fight that summer, President Obama was at a low ebb politically, at least to that point. His approval rating was down about 40%, and the unemployment rate was stubbornly stuck above 8%. The economy was not growing very fast. A lot of Democrats thought he was weak in terms of dealing with Republicans. A lot of Republicans shared that assessment. He was not in a good place. Many of the people around President Obama at that point thought that he was at best a 50-50 chance to get reelected. The president himself, I think, saw himself as an underdog in the fall of 2011. And at that point, that low point, President Obama decided that he had really no choice but to reach out to President Clinton, because their team would need all the help that they could get. And Bill Clinton knew a few things about getting reelected, knew a few things about politics, and not out of love, but out of, as I say, out of necessity, they decided it was time to start doing something they'd never done before, which was courting Bill Clinton. And that romance, that courtship began with a golf game at Andrews Air Force Base. Someone just recently wrote a story about this book in which they pointed out that really we had not written a book at all about the 2012 election. What we'd written a book about was the importance of golf in presidential politics. And Mark and I didn't realize that was true, but there's a lot of golf in Double Down. So if you like golf, you'll enjoy this book. And one of the most memorable golf scenes involves the two presidents, former and current, going out to Andrews Air Force Base for a round of golf. And now President Obama is he has a very Obama-like attitude, a very Vulcan attitude towards golf. He wants to play the game. He wants to get up and down. He's got a very strict schedule. He's a very disciplined guy. He wants to get off the course in about 2.5 hours, finish 18 holes, and get back to work. President Clinton has a different attitude towards golf. President Clinton is a retiree. He has a lot of time on his hands, and he's always been fond of taking mulligans. Now he takes a lot of mulligans, and he uses the course as an opportunity to opine and expound on pretty much any topic under the sun. They did not finish 18 holes that day, even though they were on the course for, I think, about 4 hours. And President Obama had to get back to the White House, and President Clinton kept wanting to talk. And when President Obama came off the course, one of his aides said, well, how did it go? How do you like President Clinton? He said, oh, I like President Clinton. I like him in doses, small doses. And that was the tenor of things for a little while. The president's team went up to Harlem to meet with President Obama's team went up to meet with President Clinton and try to draw him in. President Clinton's people played a little hardball with President Obama in the White House and said, you know, we'd be happy to have President Clinton help you get reelected if you're willing to pay off Hillary Clinton's debt from 2008. The Obama people did not like that. They saw that as a little bit of extortion, but they were willing to do it. That's how much they needed Bill Clinton, so they went and paid that debt off. But by the spring of 2012, President Obama and President Clinton finally had their first fundraiser together at the home of Terry McAuliffe, the guy who was the former Democratic National Committee chairman, now newly elected governor-elect of Virginia. And President Obama got to see President Clinton give a speech about Barack Obama, something he'd never seen. And President Clinton gave an incredible talk, which was really a preview of President Clinton's convention speech a few months later in Charlotte. It was a speech that was compelling, a passionate argument on behalf of what President Obama had accomplished, the work he still had to do, what the Republican alternative, in President Clinton's view, would mean for the country. And President Obama was kind of floored by President Clinton's presentation. He got in the car with his campaign manager, Jim Messina, and said, you know, I've never heard him talk about me like that before. That was great. You know, he was great. And that began the process of the actual romance, which, as I said, in Charlotte, involved President Obama turning over a night of his convention to President Clinton. Nobody's ever done that before, given a former president the ability to nominate the current president. That's a historic first. There were 3 nights of that convention. One was dominated by Barack Obama, one by Michelle Obama, and the middle night, by all normal standards, should have been dominated by Joe Biden. But instead, President Obama gave that night over to Bill Clinton. We all feel a little bad for Joe Biden in that instance. He was looking forward to that speech, but President Clinton got the stage instead and gave a tour de force. By the end of the campaign, when Superstorm I can never say this, it's like a tongue twister, Superstorm Sandy, the hurricane, hit the East Coast, and President Obama had to go off the campaign trail for several days. He was with President Clinton the night before the storm hit, and they had a conversation where President Clinton said to President Obama, you go be president, and I will take up the slack. I will do what needs to be done. And President Clinton went out and went from coast to coast in that last week of the election, campaigned in 7 or 8 states, did 22 or 23 events in the course of those times, and was constantly asking for more, saying, you know, give me one more event, give me one more event. President Clinton campaigning for President Obama as if his own name were on the ballot, and in some ways it was. This was largely part of the factor of what was going on here was, as much as President Clinton wanted to support President Obama, he also wanted to rehabilitate himself and show people that he still had his fastball. President Clinton had not ever really campaigned in a general election that was not his own. In 2000, you'll remember Al Gore did not want him to campaign on Al Gore's behalf. In 2004, President Clinton had just had heart surgery, did not campaign for John Kerry. And then in 2008, President Obama did not ask President Clinton to campaign on his behalf. And so this was really the first time since 1996 that President Clinton was able to get out on the campaign trail and do what he does best. And he did quite an incredible job for President Obama. President Clinton did have a somewhat dim view of Mitt Romney. People asked President Clinton what he thought of Governor Romney, and he said that he thought Governor Romney was a nice man who was in the wrong line of work. And so I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, I don't think he should be speaking to people in public. It's a partisan comment, but not an unfair one after the 47% and some of the other things that happened with Mitt Romney. I'll finish just by saying it's kind of it really is a romance that is very unlikely, that these two families, the Clintons and the Obamas, started out really 4 years ago as the Hatfields and McCoys, or the Montagues and the Capulets. You know, they were Democrats, certainly members of the same party, but there was not much love between them. And now, in some ways, today, and certainly over the last year, they have kind of emerged as one kind of big political family. President Obama has done a lot behind the scenes quietly to encourage people in his world to gravitate towards Secretary Clinton as she considers running in 2016. And it's been kind of an astonishing thing. We can talk about that more in Q&A too. As you know, this week, President Clinton did something that many people will not regard as having been a big favor to President Obama. I would venture to say that if President Clinton were here, he would explain to you in quite persuasive detail why the comments that he made about healthcare reform were in fact the best thing for President Obama, President Clinton, the entire Democratic Party, and he thought he was doing President Obama a favor. I'm sure he would at least make that argument, and some of you might even believe it. But it's fair to say that if Hillary Clinton does run in 2016, she will be running pretty much on Barack Obama's record and pretty much with Barack Obama's coalition and his team behind her. And I think of all the many surprises in the 2 books we've written, that is just about as great a surprise as either one of us could ever have imagined. So with that, I will end. I have managed to get through this entire talk without any profanity, and so I will, even having talked about the Clintons, so this is a safe time for me to hand off to Mark Halperin.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and we thank the library for having us back. It means we didn't mess up too badly the first time when we came to talk about Game Change. So we're honored to be back here, and nice of you all to take time on a Friday night to come listen to us talk for a bit. As John said, we're not going to talk for very long because we do want to get to the Q&A. As far as we're concerned, as you all try to think about questions, you can ask about whatever you want, and no topics off limits. You can ask about the details of the implementation of President Obama's health care plan, or what we've learned about the Clintons' marriage and reporting the last 2 books, whichever you prefer. All we'd ask is you restrict all your questions to the form of true-false. So again, as you're thinking of questions, please do that. John told us a Democratic story from the book. I want to tell a couple of related Republican stories that are, I think, kind of appropriate for this evening because they both involve this building and this facility. But I do want to say, for those of you who haven't looked through the index yet, President Reagan, Mrs. Reagan, and the Reagan Library mentioned 30 times in a 500-page book. That's not bad. And some of those instances involve, as I said, the 2 events that took place here 20 days apart in September of 2011. And they involved some of the biggest characters in our book, Governor Romney, Governor Christie, and Governor Perry, all of whom appeared here. And I'll talk about those instances in a second, but I just want to say a few more words than John did about the book and how we approach it. We'd like to write, as was said in a nice introduction, not about policy or statistics or polling. There are plenty of books about that, and we like them, and we cover that stuff in our other work as well. Our view is presidential elections are really interesting, and the people who run and their families are all really interesting. And the kind of niche that we feel we have now is to write about these elections, focusing on the high human drama of what it's like to be a candidate, to be related to a candidate, and to try to figure out how to get elected president in the system we have, which, as all of you know, is unique in the world. No one else elects their leaders quite the way we do. And it's got, as John said, it's got drama and comedy and humor. And in this race, you had an incumbent president at a time of great challenge for the nation, and a Republican Party trying to figure out how to nominate the right person. And the debates that you see throughout the book within the party, particularly focusing on Governor Romney, whether he was the right person, are the same debates we're seeing the Republican Party have now as it tries to navigate its way through dealing with the president, through the upcoming midterms, and then the next presidential election. So there's a lot in the book that is history. But again, I think some of the themes in there, just as the relationship between the Clintons and Obamas is going to have impact on what happens to the Democratic Party going forward. A lot of the issues in the book relating to the Republican Party clearly are now relevant and will be. So let me talk about these 2 stories again that took place in this facility. The first was September 7th, 2011, which was a presidential debate that took place here in the Republican Party. The library hosted the debate, as it has several others over the last few presidential cycles. And it was the first debate featuring Rick Perry, who had just gotten into the race in the month before. And Governor Romney was kind of a mess over it leading into the debate. Didn't show that publicly, but in our reporting, we were able to tease out the fact that he was not pleased about Rick Perry's entry into the race. He was, as he always is, kind of a bit of a paradox with Mitt Romney. On the one hand, he is extraordinarily optimistic about his family, about America, about the economy. He's just a really inspirationally optimistic guy, except about one thing, which is himself. and his own political fortune. He's constantly wringing his hands as a candidate. We write about it throughout the book, thinking doom is just around the corner, no matter how good things are going. He wins the Iowa caucuses, he's way ahead in New Hampshire, and all of a sudden he's thinking, well, I must lose the New Hampshire primary now because that's the way my life goes. Back to the summer when it looked like he was in pretty good shape. The person his campaign had worried the most about as a rival was Tim Pawlenty. Tim Pawlenty's campaign never really took off, and the rest of the field looked pretty weak until Governor Perry decided to get in. Governor Perry had, for the most part, suggested quite strongly he would not be a candidate for president in 2012. But over the course of, after he got reelected in 2010 and into 2011, he began to change his mind. And it worried Governor Romney like crazy. Shortly after Governor Perry got in the race, Governor Romney wrote his handful of very senior aides an email, what we would call, until the publication of Double Down, a private email, in which he described how he felt about Governor Perry getting in the race. We got a hold of that email, and I'm gonna read it to you just because I think it gives you the flavor of Governor Romney, both his optimistic side and his pessimistic side. So this was written, again, to his inner circle on August 17th, just a month before the debate here, less than a month before the debate here. Hi, team. That's a kind of a chatty start for a guy who wants to be president. I like that. Hi, team. It didn't take a PhD to figure that Rick would get a rocket boost in the polls when he finally got in. The media has been begging for his entry for months, with folks like Rush and Fox among the most passionate suitors. What does it mean for us? Of course, we will not shrink from a fight, as conflict is sure to be brought our way. And in the meantime, we will ready our forces, financial, intellectual, strategic, political. The intensity of the coming campaign will sharpen us for the contest with President Obama. He goes on to quote a poem, luckily for him, written by a New Hampshire poet. But that reflects both, again, his concern, his feelings that, for instance, a lot of the media on the right was going to be for Rick Perry, something he felt very insecure about throughout the campaign. And again, this deep-seated fear that Rick Perry would come in and be everything that he wasn't. Someone who could appeal to a lot of the people on the right of the party, someone who would be a dynamic fundraiser, in many ways potentially overshadowing Governor Romney, who was a very good fundraiser. And he approached the debate here with a lot of trepidation that up on the stage, side by side, there were other candidates on the stage, but he thought of it as kind of a one-on-one contest, that he would lose. And that his whole campaign, all the effort he'd put in running in 2008, running again this time, would all be washed away by Rick Perry. Mrs. Romney, relatively near here, maintains a place where she does some of her horse riding. And one of the lesser-known Romney homes is actually located near here. And so they were doing debate prep on the day, immediately leading up to the debate here. And Governor Romney was cloistered with just a few aides practicing for the debate. And he was extraordinarily nervous about Rick Perry. And there's a scene in the book we describe where he's fretting that he doesn't have good answers, that Rick Perry's just going to destroy him in the debate. And one of his aides, his top political advisor, Stuart Stevens, is trying to calm him down, and he just can't. And they get into a fight back and forth about, is Rick Perry going to be so formidable or not? Governor Romney, normally a pretty mild-mannered guy, stormed out of the room during the debate preparation. He was so angry at the thought that he was being told he would win the debate. That really made him angry. And he left. He came back. He did the preparation. They came here. And most of you will remember that while Governor Perry did not have his worst debate that night, he did not dominate the proceedings, and he had some weak moments. And Governor Romney left that debate feeling a lot more confident that he would be able to take on Rick Perry going down the road, and of course he did. There was somebody watching that night. John and I were here watching that debate, but someone was watching at home, which was Governor Christie. And Governor Christie did not have all the respect in the world for Governor Perry. Thought that if Governor Perry was being treated as a serious candidate, that perhaps there was something amiss with the Republican Party. And it was right in the midst of his considering whether he wanted to get in the race. He was due to speak here. Again, the debate was 20 days before Governor Christie's speech here in the library, which was the 27th of September. I came back here for that after being here for the debate. I sat in that seat right there. Where that gentleman is sitting in the blue shirt, and got to watch Governor Christie give the speech. It was, for me, probably one of the most exciting nights of the whole campaign, because in politics these days, so much is staged and pre-canned and pre-programmed, and all of us came in here not having any idea what Governor Christie was going to say. It was at the peak of the pressure on him to enter the race. There were some news reports leading up to that day, suggesting that he was in fact seriously considering the race. And there's a little story in the book about what happened when he came here. The gentleman who helps run this library, a friend of ours, John Heilemann, who's not here tonight, was kind of Governor Christie's host when Governor Christie and his wife arrived for that event that night. And I'll let you all read the full story for yourself. But suffice to say that John Heilemann led Governor Christie to one of the real highlights of the museum, which if you haven't, of the library, which you haven't seen, you should go see, which is a film about President Reagan's life. It's extraordinarily well done. And according to our book, at the end of Governor Christie's time watching that film, obviously Governor Christie, a huge fan of President Reagan, it was his first time at the library, Governor Christie had tears in his eyes having watched the film. It's our sense from our reporting that Mr. Heilemann led him to watch that film with some purpose. And there was a lot of anticipation in the room that Governor Christie might come out here on this stage and announce for president, or at least give a hint that he was thinking about it more than he had in the past. He didn't, as history will record that night. He demurred, but he did continue to consider running. And one of the things we uncovered in our reporting for the book, which surprised us, was that Governor Christie really did give it much more serious consideration than he let on at the time. And this night had a huge impact on him, not just because of the venue and not just because of the questions he got. And some of you will recall, he got a very emotional, very pleading question from a woman sitting in the audience in this room asking him to seriously consider running, but because the reaction to the speech was so positive. And one of the things about Governor Christie that he felt would make him a strong candidate, and he was absolutely right, is he's got a little bit of magic to him. He's got a little bit of energy to him. He can rouse a crowd 3,000 miles away from his home state here that evening. And I think he left here, and no doubt based on our reporting, he left here with a sense of possibility that he might do it. He didn't say it that night, but he did go home and give it one final bit of consideration. We write about the scene in the book where he does make his final decision not to run. It was on a ride back to his house from his office, pretty long ride, sitting in the back of the car being driven home. He had taken a day longer than his own self-imposed deadline to decide whether to run or not, and he made the decision on the ride back, you know what, I'm not going to run. And then Governor Christie did what I usually do after I make a big decision. He took a nap in the back of the car. Woke up when he got home, went inside, told his family that he wasn't going to do it, and his family was delighted because none of them wanted him to do it. And that decision by Governor Christie was extraordinarily fateful. Who knows what would have happened had he run, but there's no doubt that he was one of the stronger candidates potentially to run against Governor Romney, and that Governor Romney, just as he breathed a sigh of relief on the night of the debate here, when he saw that Rick Perry wasn't the giant killer that he had feared he was, but also breathed a pretty strong sigh of relief when Governor Christie decided not to run. I'm going to stop there in part because I do want to make sure we leave enough time for Q&A, and also because this is the longest I've spoken so far on the book tour without somebody yelling out, "You lie." So we're both delighted to be here and happy to take questions about whatever you'd like. So thank you very much.
Ladies, is this on? Ladies and gentlemen, as you heard, they'll take questions, and Mark said earlier that they can be as probing as you'd like, so have at it. There are microphones, and if you raise your hand, a microphone will be brought to you, and we have one in the back here. A couple questions already.
Good evening. I was fortunate enough to go out on the campaign trail during the general election for both candidates, and what I saw was an election in black and white. Is it possible that we're ever going to have a nation where it's not so divided by race and culture? I mean, I went to some Romney events in Ohio that were within the same area where the president was within a few days, and the crowds were just totally different. What is going to be done in a time in our country is becoming far more culturally diverse and younger to bring us together?
It's a great question, and it's certainly the case that this election in particular was one where the kind of demographic and racial stark division was on pretty vivid display. I think the answer to the question is, and there is no simple answer to that question, but The only thing that will change that picture is if the Republican Party figures out a way to appeal to a broader cross-section of America than it currently has. This is one of the biggest challenges the party faces going forward. There's not a world in which a Republican can win a presidential election by only appealing to white voters. And that's one of the lessons of Governor Romney's loss in 2012. The country is changing rapidly and dramatically, and a lot of people in the Republican Party recognize that this is the case, that you can't win. Literally, it's just the math doesn't work given the demographic shifts that we're seeing in the country. Governor Romney won, I think, about 27% of Hispanic voters in the country, and at that level, there's not a way to get to 50% plus one in America. George W. Bush, back in 2004 and in 2000, and the people around him recognized that appealing to African American voters, and particularly Hispanic voters, was important. President Bush won 40% of Hispanic voters in 2004, and that was an insight that his people had. It's an insight that a lot of Republican strategists and Republican elected officials now have, but it's one that some in the party don't completely embrace. And I think that the only way for the election the Democratic Party doesn't have a problem in this area. It has other problems. But appealing to a racially diverse constituency is not the Democratic Party's problem. It's the Republican Party's problem right now. And I think the most forward-thinking people in the party recognize that and are trying to do things to change it.
Yes. What is your writing process?
We conduct our interviews, get some transcripts made, fax them to Jaipur, and then people over there type it up. We lightly edit it, send it off to the publisher. Classic outsourcing. Our writing process, we did 500 interviews for the book. They're long interviews, and the reporting for these books, part of why we end up with a product that's a little bit different than what is produced during the campaign is the volume is quantitatively different. No newspaper reporter, magazine reporter, or someone writing tweets is going to do 500 interviews. But that many interviews makes it qualitatively different as well, because we're re-interviewing people. We're focusing in on scenes that require people's memories to mesh, and we then try to figure out what's important, what's interesting. We're not writing a comprehensive history in the sense of we're not writing about every primary and every caucus. And so we try to tell the story, again, as much as possible through the eyes of the individuals. One of the animating principles we came up as we were doing Game Change, which animated us in this book as well, is try to answer three questions for any given scene or plot line. One is, what challenge is a given character facing? How do they feel about it? And what do they do about it? That, you'll see that throughout the book, not explicitly, but that kind of organizing principle allows us to outline the book, and then together, and then draft back and forth, and then make some cuts, because we tend to be a little bit more interested in some stuff than we realize can fit in the book until we actually put it on the page.
I'd like to digress. I'd like to ask John, what happened to your shoulder-length blonde hair and your earring?
Gone. Clearly.
I want to tell you both I love you on the Morning Joe show. It's such a contrast between the two of you and then Joe. I heard this morning from David Axelrod, which was something I had not heard before. He said that he first met President Obama when he came to Chicago after law school. My question is, was there a machine put together early on in Chicago to take this fellow from each one of his phases to the presidency?
You mean like a machine in like a negative and nefarious way, or?
No, not negative,
No.
But just a game plan from the beginning that this young fellow
I
was
think
presidential material.
I think that many people who met Barack Obama as a younger man, thought of him as someone who could someday be president of the United States. And in fact, when he was elected president of the Harvard Law Review, which some people would tell you is a tougher job to get than president of the United States, the articles at the time talked about him as a potential future president. When I first met him, introduced by David Axelrod when he was running for the U.S. Senate, I had the same sense about him. I mean, so you can look at the history of help from David Axelrod, help from some wealthy people in Chicago, when he did run for Senate, beginning to get help from Democratic politicians around the country, including the Clintons. I think there's no doubt that people saw in him a lot, but I think there's also no doubt that most of what propelled him early on to get on a path to become president, and when he started to think about it, most of what propelled him was Barack Obama. He is an extraordinarily good political strategist. All three of our last presidents could be campaign manager for a presidential campaign. And President Obama saw the possibility to win that Senate seat, which was very tough, very contested Democratic primary. He was not very well known and not very well funded compared to some of the other candidates in the race. And from that moment forward, I think he drove an extraordinarily large percentage of the moments where he took the opportunity to put himself in a position to do what he did. There is a political machine in Chicago. Most of the constituent elements of that didn't support him when he ran for the United States Senate. So I don't think you could credit them too much with his rise, because obviously without being elected to the Senate, there was no way he was going to be elected president.
Question here in front. Please put your hands up high after each question so we can see you.
How big a deal were two events that I think of during the campaign? One was the video, if you will, of the 47% speech at the fundraiser. I think it was in Michigan. I don't remember what state it was in. And then the second one was Chris Christie with President Obama with Superstorm Sandy. Easy for me to say.
Yeah.
Or though I tend to think of those as big game changers, but you did the research. Was the election won with or without them?
Well, it's hard to disentangle and figure out any particular thing that won or lost the election. There's no question that Governor Romney's comments about the 47% were made at a fundraiser in Florida. And actually, as much as anything, we have a long, relatively detailed, I think relatively rich account of that in the book, which reveals to whatever extent Governor Romney was speaking his heart at that moment and conveyed what he actually thought. He certainly was exhausted when he made the comments, and he'd had a very, very long day. And one of the things that we've learned from doing both of these books is that one of the most fundamental human truths of presidential politics is that almost every really big mistake gets made when a candidate has not had enough sleep. And Governor Romney showed up at that event. It was a nighttime event. He'd been working all day doing fundraisers. He's had a contentious press availability earlier in the day. It was late at night. He wanted to take a nap before the fundraiser. He didn't really like being with donors. There were a lot of things about that day that went wrong for him. There is no doubt that if you think about the way that the campaign was conducted with President Obama's team having made the disqualification of Romney central to how they were running. They weren't really running defending his record because a lot of it wasn't that popular, and they weren't really running on a very robust agenda for the future. It was really all about defining Mitt Romney, and particularly defining him as being someone who was out of touch with the middle class, as a plutocrat who was not a middle class, shared middle class values, and understand the real lives of real people in the middle of the electorate. Having spent all summer long attacking him over his personal income taxes, over his history at Bain, over outsourcing, over all of those things that made up the composite picture that they wanted to paint of Governor Romney. The 47% video, when it came out, was like the icing on the cake, because it was essentially they were able to portray it, and much of the media, I think plausibly, were able to see that tape and say, this is him speaking in private, basically affirming everything that the Obama campaign has been saying in its advertising all summer long. There's nothing that's more devastating than your own words fitting into the frame that a campaign has been spending a lot of money, time, and effort to put on you. Did it change the outcome of the election? President Obama was ahead by 3 or 4 points before the 47%. For a few weeks after the 47% video came out, the gap widened to about 6 or 7 points. The Denver debate brought it back down to 3 or 4 points, and we ended up at 3 or 4 points on election day. So it's hard to say that it was decisive. The second thing I think is also true with Governor Christie, and it's easier to say. I mean, there's no doubt that the storm was bad for Mitt Romney in the sense that a challenger who is behind by 3 or 4 points, who suffers in the last 7 days of the campaign effectively a news media blackout, where they can't get any attention whatsoever, where the president gets to be presidential on national news for 3 or 4 days, and Governor Romney could not break through. There was nothing he could do. He was irrelevant in that period of time. No fault of his own. It was just the truth. No challenger who's trailing can think that was a good outcome for him. The president's people believe that looking at their data, that Governor Christie's embrace of President Obama made no difference whatsoever in terms of any voters who were still undecided in battleground states that late in the election. That they don't believe it mattered at all. Had New Jersey been a state that was in play, or New York been a state that was in play, possibly it would have been different. But for much of the country, the storm was not a voting issue, and there were some atmospheric things that helped the president there, but not in terms of actually moving votes. Again, that's what President Obama's team would tell you. Some people on the Romney team might argue the contrary, but there's not a lot of data to back that up.
How about some questions over here?
Can you comment on the role of the Tea Party, both in the past and perhaps in the future?
Tea Party is extraordinarily influential, obviously, in the midterms in 2010. And yet, by the time we get to the 2012 election, the Republican Party nominates someone who you wouldn't say would be the poster child for the Tea Party movement. Passed a health care law in Massachusetts that had an individual mandate, and in temperament was not particularly aligned with the Tea Party. So I think it's fair to say that 2 years after the Tea Party played a dominant role, their influence was much diminished. Today, I think the biggest challenge the Tea Party faces is to actually define what it's for, because the heart of the Tea Party is smaller government, lower spending. We've done pretty much all we can do on discretionary spending with the sequester cuts that have taken place. Even most Republicans don't want there to be more discretionary spending cuts. The big thing to cut are entitlement programs, and you hear all the time the classic line being someone from the Tea Party saying at a rally, "I want the government to keep its hands off my Medicare." That is a level of dissonance about what it's going to take to actually reduce the deficit, kind of sacrifices people are willing to make in cutting, particularly Medicare and Social Security. So the Tea Party is still a big part of the Republican Party. I think the challenge for anyone in the Republican Party now who wants to be president is to try to figure out how to fuse the elements of the Tea Party that provide energy and foot soldiers and fundraising and a critique of the size of the government with the establishment wing of the party, which still dominates the party's nominating process. And I think some of the Tea Party leaders, particularly people with national profiles like Senator Cruz of Texas, Senator Paul, Senator Rubio, those people I think have to do a better job of taking, again, the energy and the ideas of the Tea Party that have broader appeal and making the Tea Party a big part of the conservative movement, but not one that makes the Republican Party a minority party that can't appeal to a broader group of the public. The failure of the Tea Party to determine who the nominee would be in 2012, I think, is not been rectified, not been addressed. I think the party, if you look at the polling data and how people feel about the Tea Party movement, I think it's going to need a second wind if it's going to play anything like the role in 2014 as it played in 2010.
More questions? One in the back.
The presidential nomination contest got started off later, about 4 or 5 months later than 2008. And at the time the governor got in, the president was weak. This was after the bin Laden killing. And his poll numbers were dropping. And a few months later, given the fact that Rick Perry didn't pan out, and the governor from Minnesota didn't decide to run, why did he feel like he had to go so far to the right so that he wasn't able to make it back, or he didn't even make a real attempt to make it back to the middle? There was a debate where he rejected 10-1 spending cuts with everybody else, tax cuts. He reversed in all of his core positions as governor of Massachusetts. He didn't run on his record as governor. And he claimed to create jobs in an industry, but that's not the core point of what he was supposed to do. So why did he feel like he had to go so far to the right, given that he only had the former speaker to run against and former senator from Pennsylvania?
Just to clarify before John answers, we're political reporters, not psychiatrists, so there's only so much we can do to answer that. But
well, there are two answers, and I'll try to give them as quickly as I can. Governor Romney was a relatively liberal governor of Massachusetts. When he ran for president in 2008 is when he changed on a number of issues, particularly in the areas of culture and social issues, where he cast himself as more conservative than he had been when he was governor of Massachusetts. He did that because, for various strategic reasons, partly because in 2008, the people who were around him believed that that Rudy Giuliani sort of occupied the space that Governor Romney would naturally have occupied if he had been the governor of run really strongly as he had run in Massachusetts. So he became a more conservative figure in 2008. If you will recall, the main knock on Governor Romney in 2008 was that he had flip-flopped for exactly this reason. So as he entered the 2012 race, one of the cardinal rules that he had in his mind was that he did not want to be cast as a flip-flopper. He had kind of felt like he had that tattooed on his forehead, and he did not want to have it happen again. And what that meant was, for him, that he was not going to deviate from the positions that he took in 2008 under any circumstance. So he was now fairly far to the right on immigration. He was fairly far to the right on a variety of other social issues. And his attitude was, if I deviate, if I go back to being the governor the way that I would take the positions I had back when I was governor of Massachusetts, it will just compound the problem that I'm a phony. And so he was locked in to some extent to positions that he took in an expedient way in 2008. That was one problem. Second problem was that Governor Romney's hold on the Republican electorate was pretty weak. And so it's easy for all of us to say, as many people did, probably we did at various times, literally the two of us, that late in the Republican nomination fight that, Governor Romney's got this in the bag. This field's very weak. It's all, he's going to be fine. He's got this. He's the only plausible president in this group. Governor Romney's team saw continued threats from people like Newt Gingrich and people like Rick Santorum who wouldn't go away and who had money from billionaires who had funded super PACs that could keep their campaigns alive and who were more of a natural fit with the Tea Party that Mark was talking about before, who didn't have a lot of love for Governor Romney. So their attitude, Mitt Romney's team, was that they never felt that they fit the basic Republican nominating electorate very well, and that these threats that the national media thought were not a big deal were actually mortal threats to Governor Romney, and that they could drag out the nomination contest for months and months. And so their attitude was, not only is this, do we want to have Governor Romney take positions that were consistent with where he was in 2008, but we can't give any quarter to these challengers on the right because they can cause us no end of grief and make this situation even worse for us. We have to finish this nomination contest, get it over with. The combination of those two things put him in a very bad place by the time the nomination fight ended. And when people ask what happened between the fall of 2011, when President Obama was in very bad shape, and the spring of 2012, when he was in relatively good shape, what happened was was a nomination contest that for Mitt Romney was nothing but trouble and did nothing for him but caused him to take on an awful lot of water that made it very hard for him to win the general election.
Just a couple more.
In more current news, how do you feel about Obamacare, the results of that, and how it will affect the next elections?
Well, it's an evolving and big story. We write in the book about the night that health care passed, Obamacare passed, the Affordable Care Act, and the president was celebrating with some of his aides and the residents at the White House and said to one of them, Republicans are going to kick our butt over this. That's not exactly how he said it, but he knew full well that it was going to be a political risk. President Obama made a calculation against the advice of some of his aides that if he was going to pass a universal health care law, it was going to have to be in the first year of his first term, no matter if he won re-election or not, because he'd looked at history and saw that presidents didn't really have the ability to muscle through anything that large except in their very first year in office. And so he made the decision to pass something without Republican support, as I said, against the advice of some of his advisors. And I think that the challenge for him now is to fix the short-term problems. But the challenges won't stop then, because a lot of the country doesn't like this law. A lot of the Republican leaders don't like this law. And it's going to be increasingly difficult, unless the law becomes much more popular, for him to hold the Democratic Party together. Particularly Democrats who face tough re-elections next year are going to be inclined to start voting with Republicans to change the law. The president knows that if there is a measure that's going to come out of the House and the Senate that starts to make changes in the law, the Republican-controlled House will try to make big changes, and maybe changes in the program that he thinks will undermine it to the point where it can't work. Even if they straighten things out, even if they fend off legislation, the law still has a lot of challenges left, including the creation of a board that is supposed to help set benefit levels that are acceptable. The board that Sarah Palin called Death Panel, but is the key mechanism for controlling costs. The president's absolutely right, and he's expressed this with some frustration in the last few days, that the old healthcare system, the one Obamacare replaced, was not a system that was working very well for the country. We were spending too much money compared to other countries for results that weren't nearly as good as they could be, with a lot of inefficiency in the system and a lot of people who didn't have health care, unlike in every other industrialized democracy where people have health care as a right. So he sees a lot of positives in the law. But I believe, and I've said this on television a few times and have not heard from any Democrats yelling at me, if you don't count Twitter, that the second term for Barack Obama hangs in the balance right now. And if he can't solve this, I find it very difficult to see how he's going to get anything done in 4 years in office. And we've never had a situation where someone has a 4-year term where virtually nothing, at least in terms of domestic policy, occurs. So I think the president really does have to fix this, and that if he doesn't, it will have an impact on him, on the midterm elections, and on how Democrats approach picking a nominee for 2016.
One more question. I'll let whoever's got the microphone, I'll let you pick them up.
A lot
of pressure, yeah.
Oh, great, thank you. Do you think President Obama is a good leader or just a good politician?
Good question.
Do you think President Obama is a good leader or a good politician? Well, there's no question that he's a good politician in a certain sense. I mean, again, even that question is a little complicated. He's a very good candidate. His candidate skills are extraordinarily high. And there's no getting around the fact that for him to have won the presidency at his age with the relatively slender record that he had, to become the first African-American president, a guy with the middle name Hussein and the last name Obama rhymes with Osama, is like one of the great political candidate performances that anybody's ever had in the history of the country. And getting reelected under the circumstances that he got reelected in this election is also testament to his abilities as a candidate. He's quite extraordinary in that regard. He handles the political challenges of governing not nearly as well, and we write about this a lot in the book, that he's not been able to forge bipartisan compromise with Republicans, and there's certainly some blame to be placed at the feet of Republicans for not wanting to work with him on a lot of things. There's been a lot of relentless recalcitrance from across the aisle. It's not easy to do bipartisanship in today's environment, but that was one of the core promises he made, was that he would find a way. This is what he ran on in 2008, and he's had a hard time doing that. He's had a hard time maintaining Democratic support in a lot of instances. He's not Bill Clinton. He's not someone who enjoys or takes great pleasure in courting donors or schmoozing allies or making friends in a lot of ways. He has a very tight circle of people he cares about and trusts, and doesn't really like to reach out much beyond that. So his political skills, even as they relate to governing, are wanting to some extent. The question that Mark just answered a second ago about healthcare, I think, goes to the core of whether he's a good manager. This is the most important thing in Barack Obama's 8 years. Assuming that he finishes his second term, there's nothing more important than the healthcare law to him. It will be his signature accomplishment or his signature failure. And knowing that it was going to be his signature accomplishment or signature failure, the fact that this rollout and the implementation of this law have gone so poorly speak in a pretty devastating way to his failures as a manager of the White House and of the federal bureaucracy. He has led the Democratic Party, broadly speaking, to a place where it is better situated to win national elections than the Republican Party by far, and has a hold on the electorate and on the rising parts of the electorate that the Republican Party does not have. That is a form of leadership, and it stands the Democratic Party in very good stead heading forward. But there are many ways in which he has been, he's demonstrated that his leadership skills are not that great. He's a complicated picture. There's no one simple answer to that question. I think that's probably the case of most presidents, that there's no up or thumb down or thumb up answer to the question. But his weaknesses in some cases are his strengths, and his strengths are in some cases his weaknesses.
Well, Mark and John, thank you so much. I think you've earned a right to come back after your next book. I was just saying we'll give them an open invitation to come back after their next book. But in the meantime...
Our next book's on pottery, so just so you know.
Is it?
But
well,
thank you.
Maybe not. Anyway, they will sign books tonight, and in order to get a signed book, you first have to purchase one, and you can purchase them going out the doors over here. And I think John said they'll take cash and credit card, and I don't think they'll take
traveler's checks.
Yeah, whatever. But since it's the holiday season coming up, I don't know if you've heard, but fruitcakes are out this year. So double up on double down.
Makes a great stocking stuffer.
And, help the cause. Great writers, and we're so glad you could be with us. So if you're interested in getting a book signed, please go out to the table out and buy one. And for the signatures, we'll be lining up over on this side of the stage and coming across and exiting this side. So
whose turn is it to sign?
they're going to sign on the stage.
Backstage yours?